I will share with you Kenya's experience of this journey so far. From the very inception, our aspirations for economic development and shared prosperity has been inextricably tied to a firm commitment to environmental sustainability. In my earlier statement, I did paint the picture of where we are as a continent. I mean, the power of industrialization that has been premised on fossil fuels, despite its adverse effects, is what has driven industrialization in the world so far. The world today is at a crossroads. The crossroads being, do we continue the fossil fuel powered industrialization, which is destroying our globe with disastrous effects, or do we go green? I think that decision is no longer a decision that we are waiting to make. It is an existential threat that faces us as humanity, and the option is already made for us that we can only go green.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Sings Abdu, and you are watching the Pan-African Climate Focus. Ladies and gentlemen, last month, that is July, the nightmare news just befell those ones who are alive or advocate for climate justice. This nightmare news is to the effect that East Africa is going to be opening a new refinery in Kenya and basically in Lamu. Some of the people do take this news as good news on their part. But to the part of the climate activists, this is not good news at all. First of all, for you who is not alive to this fact, I must begin by giving you the background of the whole of this story. There has been a controversy of whether East Africa should begin its own oil refinery. And just on 7th of July 2026, Aliko Dangote, the Africa's richest man, decided that he's going to place an oil refinery in an area none other than the Lamu area. That is choosing Lamu over Tanga, where it had been expected that the oil refinery would be placed. We do not want to delve too much into why he left Tanzania, particularly Tanga, for Lamu, but the fact is, the news is Dangote is placing an oil refinery into the Lamu region. This oil refinery will be used by most of the East African countries to process their fossil fuels. That is including Kenya, the host, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, Congo, and among other East African countries. The oil refinery that is being talked about is going to cost US dollar 19 billion as the cost of construction. And Kenya alone will put a seed fund of 2.2 Kenya shillings, that is in trillion. The whole refinery will be of the capacity of 700,000 barrels per day. That is slightly bigger than the oil refinery, which is, as of today, in Nigeria, also owned by none other than Aliko Dangote today, who is proposing to put the same oil refinery in Kenya. If this oil refinery starts operating at its full capacity, along with its sister oil refinery in Nigeria, it will have reached the capacity that Africa will have reached the capacity of producing 2.1 barrels per day. That, as it is, human rights activists and activists against fossil fuels have given their stance. As well, I will be giving my stance on what this means to the African continent and the whole world at large. But before I give that version from myself and from the perspective of the climate activists, I would like to first look at our leaders, how they have been looking at fossil fuels in the past and what could have gone wrong, that today they have changed their minds, that they are in the direction of supporting fossil fuels, despite the atrocities that these burning fossil fuels are causing to this globe. Particularly the president of Kenya, who today is going to be the host and who is proving to be very much welcoming an oil refinery in his country, Kenya, and particularly Lamu. On different occasions, different functions, many symposiums, at the climate conferences, he has been caught on camera putting it outright that burning fossil fuels are the cause of the human suffering, and particularly the suffering of Africa, in as far as they cause climate change that has caused devastating effects to the Africans. But which Africans have been the least contributor to the greenhouse gases? That is, by only contributing not more than 5% of the entire global greenhouse gases. Let's watch what Ruto, the president of Kenya, has time and again been saying, and now that today he has changed his goalposts and he's in total support of the refinery and particularly the burning of fossil fuels. Let's watch.
The company of Aliko Dangote confirmed on Tuesday that a new East African oil refinery...
Although climate change is a universal existential threat, there is good reason for Africa's institutions and leadership to drive the agenda of mitigating its effects and eliminating the human activity that is driving it. The first reason is the fact that Africa is by far the least polluting continent, yet it is by far the most adversely affected by climate change. The entirety of industrial and economic activity from all of the continent's economies contributes less than 5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. These emissions are the cause of a steady and dangerous rise in global temperatures, which have resulted in the extinction of plants and animal species, rise in sea levels, disruptions in climate patterns, drought, and desertification. The brunt of these adverse effects and impacts has been borne by vulnerable African populations residing in less developed parts of the world. Droughts are more frequent and more severe. Our region has undergone a 5-season-long drought, which has decimated domestic and wild animal populations, wiped out food crops, disrupting and threatening the lives of millions of people. Water stress caused by climate change has been devastating, both directly and as a driver of conflict over water and pastures. Poverty has been exacerbated by loss of livestock, which forms the mainstay of pastoralist economic livelihoods, and massive crop failure, which weakened the foundations of farming economies. In addition to drought, African populations are experiencing floods, heat waves, and outbreak of climate change-related diseases. African livelihood, security, and development is in danger and will remain at stake unless we collectively wage aggressive combat to reverse the situation through policies and other institutional action to implement mitigation, enhance adaptation, and build resilience. The looming climate disaster is particularly tragic for Africa, which is entering a new, promising era of peace and prosperity as the continent of the future. Many vital indicators have found that indeed Africa is rising, powered by its youthful population, energy, resources, and hope. It is important for Africa to undertake concerted action to win the war on climate change because it is disproportionately affected by its adverse impacts, and also because necessary global responses to climate change are going to institute structural change. The institutional configurations and economic resets emanating from this structural change will install Africa not only as a continent of the future, but as the world's green economic superpower. Africa is abundantly endowed with all the resources required to power green industrialization. Our clean and green power potential is incomparable. Just to give you indications, 92% of our grid in Kenya is clean and green. It is the case in many other African countries, and the potential to make it the case in many African nations is real and is possible. Our clean and green power potential, as I said, is immense. Hydro, geothermal, wind, and solar power potential is super abundant. The mineral resources needed for green energy technology also exists plentifully in our continent. We are the one.
So, before we continue, that is William Ruto, the President of the Republic of Kenya. He's speaking at one of the symposiums, particularly on 23rd April 2023, Greening Judiciary's regional symposium. At that function, Ruto was clear that Africa needs a green-powered economy. And as you have been hearing, elaborate as he is, that Africa has got enough green resources that can power the development of Africa. But when you look at him today, as we shall see in this video, you'll see totally today he is a really different person. And if the one who is speaking today, after the project of the refinery has been endorsed, take place or take effect in Kenya, and the one who was speaking on that date at the symposium, if the two were brought together today, I think they can immediately engage in a fight. So I'm not sure who is fooling who. Is it our leaders that are fooling we, the led, or the led are fooling the leaders that our development as Africans can be sparked by fossil fuels other than the green economy, as he's putting it. Let's continue.
The world's youngest continent, with a mean age of 25 and growing younger every year. Our people constitute a 3 billion strong market and a pool of skilled, motivated, and capable workforce. Future global sustainability will depend on a robust engagement with Africa in many fundamental ways. The world knows this, and African institutions and stakeholders must be ready for this engagement. And that is why this symposium is very important. I am very proud of the firm commitment demonstrated by the African Union in this matter. At COP27, which was held last November in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, Africa's voice was clear. The development path taken by the world's economic and industrial powers is unsustainable and prejudicial to Africa and the global South. Climate change has brought home that fact in sobering detail. Africa is emphatic that although prosperity is an urgent goal to liberate our people from the indignity of poverty and inequality, the path of pollution is not an option. The African Union prefers a more ecologically responsible industrialization, one that promotes multi-sectoral climate resilience in agriculture and food systems, water resources, energy, transport and infrastructure, among others. We also insist, quite firmly, that international development financing must be more appropriate for the needs of our existential moment in terms of how much resources is accessible, affordable, and adequate. In February, I was encouraged to witness the impressive level of activity accomplished by African group of negotiators, especially at COP27, as well as the various African climate change initiatives. The Committee of African Heads of State and Governments on Climate Change, which I chair, also coordinates various African climate change commissions that are doing extremely important work in many regions of our continent to implement the Africa climate change and green recovery agenda. I'm honored to lead Kenya's participation in these regional, continental, and climate actions. It is a privilege to join our African brothers and sisters in this good fight and make our contribution to the defining struggle of our generation. Africa is alive to the imperative of this moment in a way that is simply inspiring. I will share with you Kenya's experience of this journey so far. From the very inception, our aspirations for economic development and shared prosperity has been inextricably tied to a firm commitment to environmental sustainability. In my earlier statement, I did paint the picture of where we are as a continent. The power of industrialization that has been premised on fossil fuels, despite its adverse effects, is what has driven industrialization in the world so far. The world today is at a crossroads. The crossroads being, do we continue the fossil fuel-powered industrialization, which is destroying our globe with disastrous effects, or do we go green? I think that decision is no longer a decision that we are waiting to make. It is an existential threat that faces us as humanity, and the option is already made for us that we can only go green. Although climate change...
Yes, that is the Republic of Kenya's President, Mr. William Ruto. He's speaking at the Greening Judiciary's regional symposium. That speech was a speech of 2023. He's clear in his message that Kenya's experience has been to expand their economy dependent on green energy. But today, I have been sometimes impressed by some of the content creators who use the term a few moments later. So at the moment, I would like to say that a few moments later, this is what William Ruto today is speaking, or this is the version of William Ruto today. Let's watch.
2.2 trillion shilling investment in our country. I have asked the Deputy President to chair the government committee that is going to work with private sector investors and players for what will be one of the largest investments in our country. The investment in the East African oil refinery. A 2.2 trillion shilling investment in our country. And we have already set a date for the groundbreaking, just for your information.
So Ruto is reacting to the news that a refinery is going to be built in Kenya. He has already forgotten his 2023 keynote speech at the Greening Judiciary's Symposium. But for us, we ask, is really Africa's development supposed to be triggered by fossil fuels or by green economy? So he also has the answer, because from the entirety of his speech, you have heard that Africa's growth must be triggered by green economy. But that is how now he has changed the goal. But when he's speaking all that, he's reacting to the news, for which I also want you to have a glance. Let's watch.
The company of Aliko Dangote confirmed on Tuesday that a new East African oil refinery backed by the Nigerian billionaire will be built in Kenya. The announcement puts a lid on months-long speculation over the location of the mega project. The massive refinery will be based in Lamu, an island off the coast of Kenya. With a capacity of 700,000 barrels per day, it is expected to be similar to Dangote's sprawling complex in Nigeria. It will take around 30 months to build the facility in East Africa's largest economy. Initially, Tanzania was also one of the locations considered for the refinery. Aliko Dangote was in Tanzania late last month, where he held talks with President Samia Suluhu Hassan. Africa's richest man reportedly explained the commercial and technical considerations behind the choice of Kenya as the refinery's location. He also invited Tanzania to participate in the Lamu investment. The refinery is viewed as a potential game changer for a region that remains heavily dependent on imported refined fuel, despite having significant crude oil reserves. The company of Aliko Dangote.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we are with our leaders. But the question still we should be asking, do we know where we are heading? Do we really know the Africa we want? He has been so clear in his speech that Africa has got enough resources, very well enough to trigger our development, and those resources are in the green economy. But that is how today he has chosen to lead East Africa and particularly to lead Kenya. At this point in time, I would like to thank you who is watching us. Thank you for keeping tuned to Pan-African Climate Focus. We request that do not turn away your attention from clicking that subscribe button. So if you have not subscribed and you are watching our content, please subscribe. And please go ahead and like, because that is the only way you help us reach very many or more viewers like you who like our content. We are not yet done. We would like to explore what lies ahead when we decide to venture into fossil fuels as East Africans, and particularly in an oil refinery. First of all, Lamu, where this refinery is going to be placed, is a coastal area. It is a coastal area having coastal mangroves, having the coastal coral reefs and the grass seabed. All these ones are exposed to the risk. These are important for the fisheries industry, for the livelihood, and for the protection of the sea itself. So it means if a refinery of this magnitude is started at the Lamu coast, all these ones are at risk. Similarly, an oil refinery means that the future of Kenya and to expand the the future of East Africa is tied into fossil fuels. Fossil intensive future. We are tied into a fossil intensive future, which is tying us into climate change as we are suffering from today. It also means that as we are moving into the clean energy that the world is changing so fast, these assets are going to be rendered redundant. Why invest in assets we very well know that soon they are going to be redundant assets, and yet these are assets that are financed by the taxpayers' money? So at the moment, I think we can change our minds and then do not venture into such a thing like going into opening up an oil refinery. But let's continue, like as it has been our mindset that we need an economy powered by clean energy. Going ahead, it shows that we are inconsistent as Africans in as far as the development that we are planning to undertake. It means we are unreliable. And what does that one show to our own people? Leaders, it means that our leaders are turning into profit makers rather than being servant leaders. Please, As that one is my version, some other experts and other activists have also given their voice onto this matter, and I would like to particularly talk about the statement by Greenpeace Africa on the proposed Dangote oil refinery in Lamu. On 14th July 2026, they responded to this whole news about the refinery that was due to be opened in Lamu. I want to read verbatim. In response to plans by Kenya and Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, to construct a 700 barrel per day oil refinery in Lamu country. This is by Shelly Odiar, oil and gas campaigner at Greenpeace Africa. She said, this project threatens to damage one of East Africa's most fragile coastal ecosystems while locking Kenya into a risky fossil fuel future. Lamu's mangroves, coral reefs, and seagrass beds are not expendable. They support fisheries, livelihoods, and coastal protection. A mega refinery of this scale brings habitat destruction, marine degradation, oil spill risk, and dangerous oil pollution. Going ahead, the promise of thousands of jobs cannot be used to hide the true cost of this investment. Large fossil fuel projects often create temporary jobs while undermining existing livelihoods in fishing, tourism, and small-scale local economies. This refinery also risks becoming a stranded asset as the world moves towards cleaner energy. It would also lock Kenya into decades of carbon-intensive development, worsening climate change and its impacts. The enormous capital required for a project of this scale could instead help accelerate Kenya's renewable energy future through solar, wind, geothermal storage, and better energy access. Greenpeace continues. Greenpeace Africa is calling for an immediate halt to approvals until an independent environmental and social impact assessment is completed, publicly released, and subjected to meaningful public participation. Any review must assess cumulative impacts on Lamu's mangroves, coral reefs, seagrass beds, and fishing livelihoods, alongside the wider economic risk of locking Kenya into costly fossil fuel infrastructure as the global energy transitions. That is the end. So, I think the whole reasoning very well resonates with what Mr. Ruto has been trying to put across in terms of what really Africa needs. So, that is also my call, that at least an environmental impact assessment be done first. And this environmental impact assessment should be an inclusive environmental impact assessment to avoid the experience of the East African crude oil pipeline, whereby most people have been left unincluded into the consultations that were undertaken, and as a result today, these people are facing devastating impacts. Good night.